An Increase in Minimum Wage by Maggie Tran. Our basic necessities in life are food, clothing, and shelter. Unfortunately, many Americans live in poverty and they can't afford to pay for rent or even have 3 meals a day. And those that are able to get by have to work multiple jobs. In Barbara Ehrenreich's book, Nickel and Dimed, she goes undercover and works low-wage jobs. Her experiment was to see if those low wages were enough to sustain a comfortable lifestyle. However, she was barely able to get by and pay for her necessities. Throughout her experience, she encountered real people who couldn't afford 3 meals a day, some who had to sleep in their car at night, or even work more than one job. Benefits of raising minimum wage include giving people a more comfortable lifestyle and reducing poverty in America. Therefore, the federal minimum wage should be increased in order to eliminate the poverty level in America. Minimum wage needs to be increased because many people cannot afford housing. And even when people can afford housing, most of their paycheck goes to paying for rent. In his editorial, Kevin Matthews argues that there's no place in the United States that people can afford to live on minimum wage. He also asserts that if you're thinking that minimum wage workers should settle for a decent one-bedroom apartment instead, that's fair, but it's also unrealistic. In most states, people earning minimum wage would need to work 60 to 80 hours per week to afford a one-bedroom apartment. In some states, such as Maryland, Virginia, New Jersey, and New York, minimum wage employees would have to work over 100 hours each week. Even those who can afford housing, they barely have enough to pay for food. Many have to skip a meal. Therefore, minimum wage needs to be increased because it is almost impossible for people to pay for their necessities, let alone pay for rent each month. Finally, Matthew asserts that housing should be a right, not a privilege. The government can acknowledge that Americans cannot afford to pay rent anymore. Then it's time for some intervention to alleviate this problem. Many people believe that raising minimum wage would force businesses to lay off employees and raise unemployment levels. However, the editorial board of the New York Times argues that the argument of increased unemployment is overstated. They argue that over the past 15 years, states and cities around the city have rushed ahead of the federal government and imposed higher minimum wages. Economists analyzing the impact of increases in jobs have concluded that moderate increases have no discernible impact on joblessness. In other words, states have increased minimum wage on their own, but there was no real impact on unemployment as the wages rose. Also, in a study done in 1994 by Alan Kruger and David Card, they compared the fast food industries in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. In New Jersey, the minimum wage was 80 cents, but not in Pennsylvania. The results showed that job growth in the fast food industry found no indication that the rise in the minimum wage reduced employment. Other studies have shown that increasing the minimum wage has either lowered the unemployment rate or have no real effect. The most important impact of raising minimum wage would be reducing the poverty level in the United States. According to a 2014 Congressional Budget Office report, increasing the minimum wage to $9 would lift 300,000 people out of poverty, and an increase to $10.10 would lift 900,000 people out of poverty. So if we increase that minimum wage, we will be able to move so many people out of poverty. But why is reducing poverty so important? One example is that families who are considered to be in poverty, it limits their mobility. In other words, children who grow up in poor families are more likely to be as poor as adults compared to children from richer families. In addition, poverty actually affects all of us. The issues that many Americans worry about, such as crime, access to affordable health care, and worker productivity, and more, are all directly affected by the condition of poverty. Furthermore, the poverty level should be eliminated because it not only greatly affects the family in poverty, but also everybody in America. In conclusion, the federal minimum wage needs to be raised because many Americans are homeless due to the expensive housing and low wages. And although many may argue that raising minimum wage increases unemployment, it actually has no real effect and may increase worker productivity. And most importantly, it will eliminate the poverty level in the United States, which actually affects us more than we think. Thank you for listening.